I should have known that dreams come with a price tag. Not the gentle kind that shows up on your credit card statement, but the sort that bleeds into your soul and demands payment in currency far more precious than dollars. The day Jason told me about the business grant, I was sitting in my corner office at Morrison & Reed, spreadsheets swimming before my eyes as I tried to make sense of our latest quarterly projections. The afternoon sun painted golden rectangles across my mahogany desk, and for a moment, as my husband's excited voice crackled through the phone, everything seemed perfect. "Maya, baby, we did it." His voice carried that boyish enthusiasm I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. The grant committee approved my proposal. $200,000 to get us started. My heart swelled with pride. Jason had spent months perfecting that business plan, staying up late into the night, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his laptop. The restaurant supply company he'd dreamed of starting would finally become reality. No more working under his insufferable boss at the distribution center. No more coming home with that defeated look in his eyes. "That's amazing, honey." I pressed the phone closer to my ear, lowering my voice as Karen from accounting walked past my office. "We should celebrate tonight. I'll pick up that bottle of Veuve Clicquot we've been saving." But celebration quickly gave way to concern. Within weeks, subtle changes began creeping into our lives like shadows lengthening across a summer evening. Jason's enthusiasm morphed into something darker, more brittle. He started taking calls in our backyard, his voice too low to carry through the kitchen window. His smiles became forced, his laughs a touch too sharp. Then came the money. I found it while doing laundry, $40,000 in crisp hundreds, rubber-banded together and stuffed into the pocket of his old winter coat. My hands trembled as I counted it, once, twice, 3 times, hoping somehow the numbers would change. They didn't. "It's just a short-term loan from an investor," Jason explained later that night, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on our kitchen counter. "The grant money is taking longer to process than expected, and we needed capital for the initial inventory orders." "An investor?" I studied his face, noting the way his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. "Why didn't you tell me about this before? And who keeps loan money in cash?" "It's complicated, Maya." He ran his hands through his salt and pepper hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was stressed. "Frank's not a traditional investor. He likes to keep things informal." The name sent a chill down my spine. "Frank who?" "Just Frank." Jason's voice carried a warning edge I'd never heard before. "Look, everything's under control. The business is already showing promise. We've got 3 major contracts lined up, and once they start paying." I wanted to believe him. God help me, I needed to believe him. But that night, as I lay awake listening to his troubled breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stepped onto a path that would lead us places we never intended to go. The changes accelerated after that. Strange cars began appearing on our street, expensive black SUVs with tinted windows that idled for hours before sliding away into the night. Jason's phone buzzed constantly with messages from unknown numbers. He lost weight, the shadows under his eyes deepening until they looked like bruises against his increasingly pale skin. One evening, I came home early from work to find him sitting in our darkened living room, staring at nothing. When I flipped on the lights, he startled like a guilty teenager, quickly shoving something into his pocket. "Jesus, Maya. You scared me." His laugh was hollow, empty of everything that made Jason himself. "I think you need to scare me instead," I said quietly, setting my briefcase down. "Tell me what's really going on." He opened his mouth, closed it, then stood abruptly. "I need to make a call." As he brushed past me, I caught a glimpse of what he'd been holding, a small notebook filled with columns of numbers, and at the bottom, circled repeatedly until the pen had nearly torn through the paper, a single word: deadline. That night, I lay awake again, this time listening to Jason's hushed voice drifting up from our backyard. Through the crack in our bedroom window, his words floated like poisoned butterflies: I know I'm late. I just need more time. Please, you have to understand. I pressed my pillow against my ears, trying to block out the sound of my husband's fear. But I couldn't block out the truth any longer. The man I loved was drowning in something dark and dangerous, and I had no idea how to save him. The next morning, as I watched him dress for work with trembling hands, I made a decision. I would find out what was happening, no matter the cost. Because sometimes love means diving into the darkness after someone, even when you're terrified of what you might find there. Little did I know, the darkness was about to show its teeth. The invitation to the Chamber of Commerce networking event sat on my desk like a loaded gun. Celebrating local business innovation, proclaimed the gold-embossed lettering, and there was Jason's company name listed among the honorees. I traced the letters with my fingertip, feeling the slight ridge they made against the cream-colored paper. How strange that something so innocent could feel so much like a noose tightening. I'd spent the past 3 weeks watching my husband unravel like a poorly knitted sweater, each day pulling away another thread of the man I thought I knew. The Jason who used to spend Sunday mornings making blueberry pancakes with our daughter Emma had been replaced by a stranger who jumped at every phone notification, who disappeared into his home office for hours with the door locked. It's just startup stress, I whispered to my reflection as I applied lipstick that evening, the deep red color a war paint of sorts. The woman in the mirror looked back at me with knowing eyes, silent judgment in her gaze. We both knew I was lying to myself. The event space sparkled with that particular breed of desperate corporate optimism, all chrome and glass and forced laughter. Jason stood near the bar, holding court with a group of potential clients. From across the room, he almost looked like himself again, confident, charming, his silver-flecked hair catching the light. But I'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his left hand kept creeping toward his phone. Maya. Karen from accounting materialized beside me, champagne flute in hand. The quarterly numbers are looking fantastic. That new client you brought in? Pure gold. I smiled and nodded, letting her words wash over me while my attention remained fixed on Jason. He'd broken away from his group and was now speaking in low tones with a man I'd never seen before, tall, expensive suit, the kind of face that belonged on a warning poster. Their body language screamed intimacy of the worst kind, conspirators rather than colleagues. "Excuse me," I murmured to Karen, drifting closer to Jason's location. Years of corporate navigation had taught me how to move through a crowd while appearing to mingle, how to seem engaged while my attention was elsewhere. I positioned myself behind a decorative pillar, close enough to catch fragments of their conversation. The stranger's voice was soft but carried an unmistakable edge of steel. "Payment schedule isn't optional, Jason. Frank's been more than generous." I know. Jason's voice cracked slightly. "The contracts are coming through. 2 weeks, tops. I just need 2 weeks." The man's laugh could have stripped paint. "That's not how this works. You knew the terms when you took the money. Either you start moving product through your warehouse the way we discussed, or..." My champagne flute slipped from suddenly numb fingers, shattering against the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in my ears, drawing every eye in the vicinity. Including Jason's. Our gazes locked across the glittering debris of broken glass. In that moment, I saw everything, the fear, the guilt, and something worse, resignation. The stranger melted away into the crowd with practiced ease, leaving my husband standing alone, exposed. Later, in our parked car outside the venue, the truth spilled out of Jason like blood from a wound. "Frank's people, they're not traditional investors, Maya. They saw an opportunity when the grant money got delayed. Said they could help. The interest rate seemed high, but I was desperate to get started." "How much?" My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. 200,000. He stared straight ahead through the windshield, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "But with the weekly interest, it's more now. Much more." The numbers hit me like physical blows. And these people, they're connected. Jason swallowed hard. The kind of connected that doesn't show up in business directories. Oh God. The world tilted sideways, reality restructuring itself around this new terrible truth. That's what they meant about moving product through the warehouse, isn't it? They want me to help them clean their money. His voice was barely a whisper. Use the business as a front. Maya, I didn't know what else to do. The grant money still hasn't come through, and they're not the kind of people who take no for an answer. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar corporate mask I wore daily cracking under the weight of this revelation. All our dreams, our careful plans, our future, everything was balanced on the edge of a knife held by people who made their living drawing blood. We need to go to the police, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew it wasn't that simple. Jason's laugh was bitter, bordering on hysteric. They have pictures of Emma at school, Maya. They know her schedule, her teacher's name. They made sure I understood exactly what I was agreeing to. The mention of our daughter sent ice through my veins. Emma, with her father's eyes and my stubborn chin, who still believed the world was fundamentally good and safe. The thought of her becoming collateral damage in this nightmare made something shift inside me, something fundamental and irreversible. Tell me everything, I commanded, my voice steady despite the hurricane raging in my chest. Every detail, every name, every conversation. If we're going to find a way out of this, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. As Jason began to speak, I pulled out my phone and started recording. The corporate warrior in me, the one who had clawed her way up through the ranks of Morrison and Reed, knew that information was power. And right now, information might be the only weapon we had. What I didn't tell Jason was that I'd already begun forming a plan, one that would either save us all or destroy everything we'd built. Because sometimes the only way to fight monsters is to become one yourself. Fear has a taste, metallic and sharp, like blood on your tongue after biting the inside of your cheek. I'd been living with that taste for days now, letting it fuel the machinery of my mind as I crafted contingency plans within contingency plans. The corporate strategist in me had taken control, transmuting terror into tactical advantage with the precision of an alchemist turning lead into gold. In my office at Morrison and Reed, I sat before my computer screen, its blue light casting shadows across the scattered papers of Jason's confession. I'd transcribed every word from that night, breaking down his scattered narrative into clinical bullet points, dates, names, amounts. The detective in me was picking apart the threads of our undoing, searching for the loose end that might unravel everything. "You're different lately," my brother David observed over lunch, his attorney's eyes dissecting my carefully maintained facade. We sat in his corner office, 28 floors above the city that suddenly felt more like a battlefield than home. Distracted. Harder somehow. If only he knew how hard I'd become, diamond sharp and just as cold. "I need your help, David, but I need you to listen without your lawyer hat on first." The story spilled out of me like a confession, each detail carefully curated to paint the picture without revealing the depths of the horror I discovered. David's face transformed as I spoke, professional detachment giving way to brotherly concern, then to something approaching fear. "Jesus Christ, Maya." He pushed away from his desk, pacing the length of his office. The city sprawled below us, a maze of possibilities and dead ends. This isn't just some business dispute. These people, they don't play by any rules we recognize. I know. My voice was steady, belying the tremor in my hands. That's why I need to know what rules they do play by. David stopped pacing, turning to face me with an expression I'd never seen before, part pity, part admiration, part terror. "The best thing you can do is convince Jason to go to the FBI. Witness protection exists for exactly this kind of situation. And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. Having Emma grow up afraid of her own shadow." The laugh that escaped me was bitter as winter wind. "No. There has to be another way. Maya. David's voice carried a warning edge. Just tell me what you know about organizations like this. How they operate, their weak points. Give me something to work with. He studied me for a long moment, professional training warring with familial duty. Finally, he sighed. I can't help you directly, my position won't allow it. But I know someone, a private investigator. She specializes in corporate intelligence. If anyone can help you navigate this mess legally, it's her. The card he slid across his desk bore a single name and number, Sarah Chen, Specialized Solutions. That afternoon, I sat in my car in the parking garage, Sarah's card burning a hole in my pocket as I watched Jason's warehouse through binoculars. The building looked innocuous enough, just another commercial property in a sea of identical structures. But now I knew it for what it really was, a chess piece in a game where the stakes were measured in blood and broken promises. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason, they want to meet tomorrow. Said they have a business proposition. The words sent ice through my veins, but my hands remained steady as I typed my response. What time? 7 p.m. The Capitol Grill. I closed my eyes, letting the familiar weight of strategy settle over me like armor. The Capitol Grill, public enough to prevent obvious violence, expensive enough to keep out casual observers. They were smart, these shadows that had invaded our lives. But smart didn't mean invincible. That evening, I sat at my vanity, studying my reflection with new eyes. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, someone harder, more dangerous than the Maya who had built her life on spreadsheets and quarterly projections. She was someone who understood that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to become what you fear. I picked up Sarah Chen's card, dialing the number with deliberate precision. It rang twice before a crisp voice answered. Ms. Chen's office. My name is Maya Collins. My voice carried none of the tremors that plagued my heart. I need information about an organization run by someone named Frank. They specialize in high-interest loans and creative accounting. A pause, heavy with significance. That's not the kind of information that comes cheap, Mrs. Collins. I understand. The diamond hardness in me sparkled with deadly purpose. Money isn't an object. But time is. Another pause, shorter this time. I have an opening tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. I'll be there. As I hung up, my gaze fell on the family photo on my dresser, Jason, Emma, and me at the beach last summer, all sun-kissed smiles and innocent joy. The image blurred as tears finally broke through my carefully constructed walls. I'll fix this, I whispered to our happier selves. Whatever it takes. Later that night, as I lay beside Jason's restless form, I felt the last pieces of my old self falling away like autumn leaves. In their place grew something new, something forged in the crucible of desperate love and calculated rage. Because while they might be experts at breaking people, I was becoming an expert at breaking systems. And every system, no matter how careful, has its weak points. I just had to find them before they found Emma's teacher. The morning Sarah Chen laid out the architecture of our destruction, I watched dawn creep across her office like spilled wine. The PI's workspace was sparse, clinical, a temple dedicated to the dissection of secrets. Much like the woman herself, whose eyes carried the weight of 1,000 shattered illusions. Frank Calloway, she said, sliding a dossier across her glass desk. Former hedge fund manager turned private lender. The kind who specializes in desperate people with impossible dreams. My fingers trembled as I opened the file, each page a revelation that turned my stomach to ice. The photographs inside told stories of other dreams corrupted, businesses that had flourished briefly before withering into shells, their owners vanishing into the ether of witness protection or worse. Frank's organization wasn't just a criminal enterprise, it was an infection, spreading through the vulnerable tissue of desperate ambition. And now they want to use Jason's warehouse. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Sarah's smile held no warmth. Money laundering is just the beginning. Once they have their hooks in, they'll want more. Always more. The truth of it settled into my bones like winter frost. I thought of Jason, of the way hope had blazed in his eyes when he first spoke of his business dreams. How that light had dimmed, replaced by something haunted and hollow. They hadn't just stolen our money, they'd corrupted the very essence of his ambition, turning gold into lead with their poison touch. That evening, I stood in our kitchen, watching Jason prepare for his meeting with Frank's people. His hands shook as he adjusted his tie, the silk whispering accusations against his fingers. The man before me was a shadow of himself, eroded by fear and guilt until only the bare scaffolding of his spirit remained. "I have to go," he said, not meeting my eyes. They said they have a solution. A way to make everything right." The laugh that escaped me was sharp enough to draw blood. "Nothing they offer will make this right, Jason. Their solutions are just prettier prisons." He turned then, and the desperation in his face nearly brought me to my knees. "What choice do we have? They know about Emma, Maya. They know everything." Knowledge crystallized within me like frost on a window, beautiful, deadly, and absolutely clear. They knew everything about us, yes. But thanks to Sarah's investigation, I now knew everything about them too. The weight of the USB drive in my pocket, heavy with their secrets, felt like a loaded gun. "Go to the meeting," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. "But don't agree to anything. Buy us time." The door closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid, and I was alone with the magnitude of what I had to do. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah with an address and a warning: "Be careful. These people play for keeps." I made my way to our bedroom, opening the false bottom of my jewelry box where I kept the evidence we'd gathered. Financial records showing the pattern of their operation. Names of their shell companies. Photographs of meetings with known criminals. Each piece a bullet in the gun I was building. The doorbell rang, shattering my concentration. Through the security camera, I saw them, two men in expensive suits, their faces carrying that particular blend of civility and menace that marked Frank's organization. They hadn't waited for Jason to reach the restaurant. They'd come for me instead. My heart thundered against my ribs, but my hands remained steady as I opened my phone's recording app. Sometimes the best weapon isn't the secret you keep, but the one you let your enemy know you possess. "Mrs. Collins." The taller one smiled as I opened the door, all teeth and predatory intent. "We thought it was time we had a chat. Woman to woman, so to speak." I let them in, these serpents in their designer suits, watching as they settled onto our living room sofa like they belonged there. They looked so ordinary, these men who dealt in broken dreams and shattered lives. But I could see the darkness coiling beneath their polished surfaces, ready to strike. "Jason won't be joining us?" The question carried a threat wrapped in silk. "He's on his way to meet your colleagues." I sat across from them, legs crossed, every inch the corporate executive I'd spent years becoming. "But I think we all know this conversation needs to happen without him." The shorter one leaned forward, his cologne expensive enough to mask the smell of corruption. "Smart woman. See, Jason, he's a dreamer. Dreamers are useful, but they're not always practical. You, on the other hand. Let's be practical then." I met his gaze without flinching. "You want to use our business to clean your money. To move product through our warehouse. To own us." Their smiles widened fractionally, sharks scenting blood in the water. But they didn't realize the blood they smelled was bait, not weakness. "What we want," the tall one said softly, "is cooperation. In return for which, certain debts might be renegotiated." I stood, moving to the window where the setting sun painted the world in shades of fire. In the reflection of the glass, I watched them watching me, calculating my worth as an asset or an obstacle. They saw what they expected to see, a desperate woman backed into a corner. They didn't see the steel beneath my silk, the warrior beneath my wounds. I have a counter-proposal, I said, turning to face them. One that will either save all of us, or destroy everything. As I began to speak, I felt the last bridges to my old life burn behind me. Sometimes salvation comes only through fire, and rebirth requires the courage to burn. Power, I've learned, is not a single currency but a spectrum of possibilities, each shade carrying its own terrible beauty. As I sat in my office the morning after confronting Frank's men, I felt it coursing through me like liquid nitrogen, burning cold, crystallizing my resolve into something harder than diamond, more lethal than steel. The evidence Sarah had gathered lay spread before me like tarot cards, each document spelling out a future written in the ink of other people's destruction. But unlike Frank's previous victims, whose fates were chronicled in clinical police reports and bankruptcy filings, I refused to be another casualty in his garden of broken dreams. My phone vibrated, a message from Jason, "They're watching the house." Black SUV, tinted windows. "Maya, what did you say to them?" I closed my eyes, remembering the look on their faces when I'd laid out my knowledge of their operation. The flicker of uncertainty that had crossed their polished facades when I mentioned specific dates, amounts, names that should have been buried in layers of shell companies and digital obscurity. The way their smiles had frozen when I'd casually dropped the name of their offshore accounting firm. "Stay at the warehouse," I texted back. "Don't come home yet. Trust me." Trust, such a fragile thing, as delicate as a soap bubble and just as iridescent with possibility. I thought of Emma, safely ensconced at my sister's house in Connecticut, far from the poisonous reach of Frank's organization. The weight of her absence felt like a physical wound, but it was a pain I welcomed. Some prices are worth paying for survival. Sarah's voicemail waited like a loaded gun, "They're moving faster than we anticipated. Frank's people are liquidating accounts, shifting assets. Whatever you're planning, you need to do it now." The corporate warrior in me recognized the patterns, the savage geometry of predators preparing to strike. But they didn't realize that while they'd been studying their prey, I'd been learning to become a hunter. I opened my laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard as I prepared to detonate the first of many carefully placed charges. The email to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division was already drafted, each attachment a blade aimed at the heart of Frank's empire. But timing was everything, a lesson I'd learned in boardrooms long before I'd been forced to apply it to survival. My office door opened, and Karen from accounting stepped in, her face tight with concern. "Maya, there are some men here to see you. They say it's about Jason's business loan." The moment crystallized like frost on glass, beautiful, deadly, and absolutely clear. They'd come to my territory, thinking to corner me in the maze of corporate propriety. They didn't understand that every queen knows her own castle best. "Send them in," I said, my voice carrying none of the earthquake happening beneath my skin. As Karen left, I pressed "send" on the email, feeling the future reshape itself with each passing second. They entered like sharks in expensive suits, different men from last night, but cut from the same predatory cloth. The taller one spoke first, his voice smooth as poison honey. "Mrs. Collins, Mr. Calloway would like to discuss the terms of your counter-proposal." I gestured to the chairs before my desk, noting how they positioned themselves, the larger man slightly forward, his partner angled toward the door. Tactical positioning, betraying their true nature beneath the veneer of business legitimacy. "I'm afraid any discussion of terms is premature," I replied, opening a folder on my desktop. "You see, I've just made some rather interesting financial disclosures to several regulatory bodies. Would you like to see what I've shared?" The younger one's hand twitched toward his jacket, an aborted tell that spoke volumes about what lay beneath his tailored facade. But we were in my world now, where violence was conducted with keystrokes and paper cuts rather than cruder tools. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," the tall one said, his smile tightening at the edges. "Mr. Calloway is a reasonable man, but his patience has limits." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm dealing with." I turned my monitor toward them, displaying a complex web of transactions and shell companies. The question is, do you know what you're dealing with? Their expressions shifted microscopically as they recognized the patterns on my screen, the digital DNA of their organization laid bare. But I wasn't finished. With deliberate precision, I opened another window, this one showing live security footage of their cars in the parking garage, their license plates clearly visible. Right now, similar evidence is being reviewed by the FBI, SEC, and several other agencies whose acronyms you really don't want to know. The only question remaining is whether you want to be caught in the blast radius when it all comes down. The younger one stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're bluffing. Am I? I smiled, feeling the sharp edges of my transformation cut through my own skin. Check your phones. I'm sure Mr. Calloway is trying to reach you right now. As if on cue, their phones buzzed simultaneously. The color drained from their faces as they read whatever messages appeared on their screens. In that moment, I saw my reflection in their eyes, not the desperate wife of a man drowning in debt, but something far more dangerous, a woman who had learned to weaponize truth itself. We'll be in touch, the tall one said, his composure cracking around the edges. But we both knew it was a lie. The game had changed, and they were no longer the only ones who knew how to play for keeps. After they left, I sat in my quiet office, watching the sun paint shadows across my desk. The woman I had been, the one who believed in order, in systems, in playing by the rules, was gone, transformed by necessity into something both more and less than human. In her place sat a creature of calculated rage and precise vengeance, ready to burn down the world to protect what she loved. My phone buzzed one final time, a message from Sarah, "It's done. They're running." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of victory settle around my shoulders like a crown of thorns. Because sometimes winning means becoming the very thing you feared, and salvation comes at the price of your own innocence. Rebirth, I've discovered, tastes like wood smoke and winter rain, bitter and cleansing all at once. As I stood in our empty house 3 months after Frank's empire began to crumble, I traced my fingers along the walls that had witnessed our undoing and our salvation, feeling the ghostly echoes of who we used to be. The FBI had moved with surgical precision once they received my evidence. Frank's organization collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane, each carefully constructed layer of legitimacy peeling away to reveal the rot beneath. But victory, I'd learned, was rarely as clean as the sanitized reports would suggest. The last of them was arrested this morning, Sarah's voice crackled through my phone, carrying the weight of finality. Frank tried to run. It didn't end well for him. I closed my eyes, letting the news settle into my bones like autumn frost. There should have been triumph in this moment, or at least relief. Instead, I felt hollow, carved out and reinvented by the crucible of the past months. The woman who had started this journey, the Maya who believed in order and justice and the fundamental fairness of the world, was as dead as Frank's criminal empire. In her place stood someone else entirely, someone forged in the fires of desperate love and calculated vengeance. A creature who understood that sometimes salvation requires sacrifice, and that the price of protecting what you love might be pieces of your own soul. Jason found me there, standing in our darkened living room like a sentinel guarding the ruins of our former life. He'd lost weight during our time apart, while I orchestrated our salvation from the shadows. The silver in his hair had spread like frost, marking the toll of our ordeal in shades of winter. "Emma's asleep," he said softly, coming to stand beside me. "She asked when we can go home for good." Home. Such a simple word for such a complex concept. We'd spent the past months in a series of safe houses, protected by the very system I'd helped set in motion. Our house had become a crime scene, then a repository of evidence, and finally just an empty shell waiting to be re-inhabited. "Did you tell her about the new house? The one in Seattle?" He nodded, his shoulder brushing mine, a tentative reconnection, like two planets relearning their orbits after a cosmic disturbance. "She's excited about being near the ocean." Says she wants to learn to sail. A laugh bubbled up from some deep, untouched place within me, the first genuine mirth I'd felt in what seemed like ages. Of course our daughter would emerge from this chaos dreaming of new adventures. Children are remarkably resilient that way, their spirits bending like saplings in a storm rather than breaking. Maya, Jason's voice carried a weight I'd grown familiar with, the burden of unspoken guilt and gratitude. What you did, how you saved us. I turned to face him, really seeing him for the first time in months. The dreamer I'd fallen in love with was still there, beneath the layers of trauma and regret. But he'd been tempered by reality, just as I'd been transformed by necessity. I did what had to be done, I said simply, because how could I explain the complexities of my metamorphosis? How do you tell the person you love that protecting them required becoming something both more and less than human? He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine like roots seeking stability in uncertain soil. The way you handled everything, it was terrifying. And amazing. I didn't know you had that in you. Neither did I. The truth of it rang like a bell in the quiet room. But that's the thing about survival, you never really know what you're capable of until being capable is the only choice you have. Later that night, as I packed the last of our belongings for the move west, I found the red dress I'd worn to that fateful Chamber of Commerce event. The fabric still held the memory of that evening, when my world had begun its inexorable shift from ordinary to extraordinary. I held it up to the light, studying the way the silk caught the moonlight like spilled blood. Then, with deliberate care, I placed it in the donation pile. Some costumes you outgrow not because they no longer fit, but because you've become something they never could have contained. My phone buzzed one last time, a message from David, the last of the paperwork is signed. You're officially free. Free. Another simple word for a complex truth. Because freedom, I'd learned, isn't just the absence of chains. Sometimes it's the knowledge that you've become strong enough to break them yourself, and wise enough to understand the cost of doing so. I walked to Emma's room, watching her sleep peacefully in the ambient glow of her night light. In the soft illumination, I could see both who she was and who she might become, strong, resilient, unafraid. She would grow up knowing that her mother had moved mountains to protect her, had reshaped reality itself to ensure her safety. But more importantly, she would grow up knowing that sometimes the most dangerous wolves are the ones in designer suits, and that true strength often lies not in avoiding darkness, but in learning to wield it for the right reasons. As I stood there, guardian and warrior, mother and avenger, I felt the last pieces of my transformation settle into place like stars finding their constellations. The Maya who began this journey had died in the crucible of necessity, yes. But what had risen from those ashes was something remarkable, a phoenix crafted from equal parts love and steel, capable of both incredible tenderness and calculated destruction. Tomorrow, we would board a plane to our new life, leaving behind the ashes of our old one. But tonight, I kept vigil over my sleeping daughter, a sentinel at the gates of our future. Because sometimes happy endings aren't about returning to who you were, but about becoming who you needed to be, and finding peace in the power of that transformation.